The Secret of the Hollow Tree. Chapter 1. A mysterious disturbance. High up in the branches of an ancient oak tree, nestled in a cozy hollow, lived Detective Hoot. He was no ordinary owl with his piercing yellow eyes, ruffled gray feathers, and a tiny magnifying glass that never left his wing. Hoot was the most renowned detective in all of Whispering Woods. On this particular evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to twinkle, Detective Hoot was jolted awake by a commotion outside his tree. Blinking away his daytime drowsiness, he poked his head out of his hollow and peered down at the forest floor. "Great horned owls," he exclaimed. "What in the name of Mouse Whiskers is going on down there?" Below, a group of woodland creatures had gathered around the base of an enormous hollow tree that stood at the heart of Whispering Woods. Squirrels chattered nervously, rabbits thumped their feet in agitation, and a family of raccoons huddled together, their masked faces etched with worry. Detective Hoot ruffled his feathers importantly and swooped down to investigate. As he landed on a low branch, the crowd of animals fell silent, all eyes turning to the wise old owl. Detective Hoot squeaked Millie, a young field mouse with bright eyes and a quivering whiskers. "Thank goodness you're here. Something strange is happening in the hollow tree." Hoot adjusted his magnifying glass and peered at the little mouse. "Calm yourself, young Millie. Now, tell me exactly what you've observed." Millie took a deep breath and began to explain. "Well, you see, Detective, strange noises have been coming from inside the hollow tree for the past 3 nights. Whispers and giggles, and sometimes even a glow like fireflies, but not quite the same." Most intriguing," Hoot mused, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "And has anyone ventured inside to investigate?" The gathered animals shuffled their paws and claws nervously, shaking their heads. "And no," Detective stammered Benny Badger, his black and white striped face peeking out from behind a bush. "We're all too scared. What if it's ghosts?" A collective shudder ran through the crowd, and Detective Hoot had to hoot loudly to restore order. Now, let's not jump to conclusions," he said firmly. "In all my years as a detective, I've never encountered a single ghost. There's always a logical explanation, and it's my job to find it." With a determined ruffle of his feathers, Detective Hoot hopped down from his branch and waddled towards the entrance of the hollow tree. The crowd of animals held their breath as he paused at the opening, his large yellow eyes peering into the darkness within. "He muttered, pulling out his magnifying glass. "Most curious indeed." The detective bent down and examined the ground around the tree's entrance. His keen eyes spotted something that made him let out a soft aha. Gently, he picked up a tiny object with the tip of his wing. "What is it?" Detective Hoot called out Rusty the Fox, his bushy tail twitching with curiosity. Hoot held up the object for all to see. It was a small, shimmering scale, no bigger than a dewdrop, that gleamed with an iridescent light in the fading evening glow. "I'm not entirely sure," Hoot admitted, "but this is certainly our first clue. It appears to be some sort of scale, but not from any creature I've ever encountered in Whispering Woods." A murmur of excitement and apprehension rippled through the gathered animals. Detective Hoot carefully tucked the mysterious scale into a small pouch he wore around his neck, then turned back to face the hollow tree's entrance. "Well, my friends," he announced, "there's only one way to solve this mystery. I'm going in." Gasps echoed through the crowd. Millie the mouse scurried forward, her tiny paws clasped together. "But Detective Hoot, what if it's dangerous?" The old owl's eyes twinkled with a mix of wisdom and mischief. "My dear Millie, danger is part of a detective's job. But fear not, for I have a plan." He turned to address the assembled animals. "I'll need a few brave volunteers to assist me in this investigation." For a moment, silence fell over the clearing. Then, slowly, a few paws and wings raised into the air. "Excellent," Hoot nodded approvingly. "Millie, your keen ears and small size could be invaluable. Rusty, your night vision and stealth will be a great asset. And Benny Badger, your strength might come in handy if we need to move anything inside the tree." The chosen animals moved to stand beside Detective Hoot, a mix of nervousness and excitement on their faces. "Now," said Hoot, turning to face the rest of the woodland creatures, "I want the rest of you to return to your homes and stay alert. If you notice anything unusual, anything at all, send word to me immediately. Understood?" The animals nodded solemnly and slowly began to disperse, casting worried glances back at the hollow tree as they melted into the darkening forest. Detective Hoot turned to his small team of assistants. "Are you ready, my brave friends?" Millie, Rusty, and Benny nodded, though Benny's nod was a bit shaky. "Very well," said Hoot. "Let's solve the mystery of the hollow tree." With that, the unlikely group of investigators stepped into the darkness of the enormous tree, ready to uncover the secret that lay within. As they disappeared from view, the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, and Whispering Woods fell into an uneasy silence, waiting to see what Detective Hoot and his team would discover. Chapter 2. Into the Unknown. As Detective Hoot and his makeshift team of investigators entered the hollow tree, darkness enveloped them. The air inside was cool and damp, with a faint, sweet scent that none of them recognized. "Stay close," everyone, Hoot whispered. "Rusty, what do your keen eyes see?" Rusty the fox squinted into the gloom. "It's hard to make out much, Detective. The inside of the tree seems bigger than it should be." "Curiouser and curiouser," Hoot muttered. He turned to the little field mouse. "Millie, what do your sensitive ears pick up?" Millie's whiskers twitched as she strained to listen. "I hear rustling, Detective, and something that sounds like tiny bells, very far away." Benny Badger, bringing up the rear, gulped audibly. Maybe this wasn't such a good idea after all," he stammered. "Nonsense, my good Badger," Hoot reassured him. "We've only just begun our investigation. Now, let's see what my magnifying glass can reveal." The owl detective pulled out his trusty tool and began to examine the inner walls of the tree. As he moved the glass over the rough bark, something caught the dim light and sparkled. "Aha!" Hoot exclaimed softly. "Look here, everyone." The team huddled around, peering at where Hoot's magnifying glass was focused. Embedded in the wood were more of the tiny, shimmering scales they had found outside. "They're all over the place," Rusty observed, his bushy tail swishing with excitement. "Indeed," said Hoot. "But what could have left them? Certainly no creature I've ever encountered in Whispering Woods." As they pondered this new clue, a sudden gust of wind whispered through the hollow tree, but instead of the usual forest scents, it carried the aroma of sugar cookies. "Do you smell that?" Millie squeaked, her nose twitching rapidly. Before anyone could respond, a soft giggle echoed from deeper within the tree, followed by a flash of light that illuminated the interior for a brief moment. Benny let out a startled yelp and jumped behind Rusty. "Ghosts," he cried. Now, Hoot said calmly, though his feathers were slightly ruffled. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Remember, there's always a logical explanation. We just need to find it." Gathering his courage, Detective Hoot led the team deeper into the hollow tree. As they ventured further, they noticed that the inside of the tree didn't seem to match its outside dimensions. The passage they were following twisted and turned, leading them down what felt like a gentle slope. "This doesn't make any sense," Rusty muttered, his ears twitching in confusion. "We should have run out of tree by now." "You're right," Hoot agreed, his eyes narrowing in thought. "It seems we've stumbled upon something far more complex than a simple hollow tree. But what could it be?" Just then, Millie, who had scampered a little ahead, let out an excited squeak. "Detective Hoot. Everyone, come look at this." The group hurried forward to where Millie stood at the edge of a widening in the passage. As they emerged from the tunnel, they found themselves in a large circular chamber that seemed to glow with a soft, warm light. The walls of the chamber were smooth and pearlescent, nothing like the rough bark they had seen before. The floor was covered in a carpet of moss so soft it felt like walking on clouds. But most astonishing of all was what hung from the domed ceiling: hundreds of tiny, glowing orbs that looked like captured starlight. "Great horned owls," Hoot breathed, his eyes wide with wonder. "In all my years, I've never seen anything like this." Rusty padded around the chamber, sniffing curiously. "The cookie smell is stronger here," he observed. Benny, momentarily forgetting his fear in the face of such beauty, reached out a paw to touch one of the walls. "It's warm," he said, surprised. As the team explored the chamber, Millie's sharp eyes spotted something near the center of the room. "Look," she cried, pointing with her tiny paw. "There's some kind of door." Sure enough, on the far side of the chamber was a small, round door, no taller than Benny. It was made of a material that looked like polished amber and was carved with intricate swirling patterns. Detective Hoot hopped over to examine it more closely. As he peered through his magnifying glass at the door's surface, he noticed something peculiar. Well, he said, a note of excitement in his voice. "It seems we found where our mysterious scales came from. Look here." The others gathered around and gasped in surprise. The door's intricate patterns weren't carvings at all, but thousands of tiny, iridescent scales arranged in beautiful designs. "But what's behind the door?" Rusty asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. As if in answer, another giggle sounded from beyond the door, followed by a flash of multicolored light that seeped through the cracks around its edges. Detective Hoot straightened up, adjusting his magnifying glass with a determined air. "There's only one way to find out," he declared. "Are you ready, my brave friends?" Millie, Rusty, and Benny exchanged glances, a mix of fear and excitement on their faces. Then, one by one, they nodded. "All right then," said Hoot, reaching out a wing towards the door. "Let's see what secret this hollow tree has been hiding." With a deep breath, Detective Hoot pushed gently on the scale-covered door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft chiming sound, the door swung slowly open, revealing a sight that would change life in Whispering Woods forever. Chapter 3. A Magical Discovery. As the amber door swung open, Detective Hoot and his team were bathed in a warm, shimmering light. Their eyes widened in amazement at the scene before them. Beyond the door lay a vast, glittering cavern that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. The walls sparkled with embedded gems of every color imaginable, and floating in the air were hundreds of tiny, winged creatures no taller than Millie the mouse. "Fairies," gasped Rusty, his bushy tail swishing in excitement. Indeed, the air was filled with diminutive beings with gossamer wings and clothes made from flower petals and leaves. They flitted about, leaving trails of sparkling dust in their wake. Some were tending to strange, luminous plants that grew from the cavern floor, while others appeared to be constructing intricate structures from what looked like spun sugar and candied fruits. At the center of all this activity stood a magnificent tree, far larger than any in Whispering Woods. Its trunk was the color of honey, and its leaves shimmered like polished emeralds. Wrapped around the tree was a spiraling staircase made of what appeared to be solidified rainbow light. Detective Hoot blinked rapidly, hardly believing his eyes. "Well," he said, adjusting his magnifying glass, "I do believe we've solved the mystery of the strange noises and lights. Though I must admit, this raises far more questions than it answers." Just then, a small group of fairies noticed the newcomers. With excited chirps and giggles, they flew over to investigate. The woodland creatures instinctively huddled closer together as they were surrounded by the curious fairy folk. One fairy, with wings like a blue morpho butterfly and wearing a crown of tiny starflowers, flew right up to Detective Hoot's beak. "Welcome, visitors from the world above," she said in a voice that sounded like tinkling bells. "I am Queen Luminara of the Whisperwind Fairies. What brings you to our hidden realm?" Hoot cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "Greetings, Your Majesty. I am Detective Hoot, and these are my associates Millie, Rusty, and Benny. We came to investigate some strange occurrences in the hollow tree above." Queen Luminara's tiny face fell. "Oh dear," she said, wringing her hands. "I was afraid this might happen. You see, we've been having some technical difficulties with our concealment magic lately." Benny, who had been cowering behind Rusty, peeked out curiously. "Concealment magic?" The Fairy Queen nodded. "Yes. For centuries, we fairies have lived in secret beneath Whispering Woods, using our magic to hide our home from the world above. But recently our spells have been weakening, allowing sounds and lights to escape." "But why hide it all?" Millie piped up, her whiskers twitching with curiosity. Queen Luminara sighed, a sound like a gentle breeze through wind chimes. "It's a long story, one that goes back to the early days of Whispering Woods. Perhaps it's time it was told." She gestured towards the giant tree at the center of the cavern. "Please follow me to the council tree. There we can talk more comfortably, and I can explain everything." As they made their way across the cavern floor, the woodland creatures marveled at the fairy realm. Rusty's keen nose picked up the scents of 1,000 flowers he'd never smelled before. Millie's ears twitched at the sound of fairy music, played on instruments made from acorn caps and blades of grass. Even Benny, who had been so frightened before, found himself relaxing in the peaceful atmosphere of the underground world. Detective Hoot, ever observant, noticed something curious as they walked. "Your Majesty," he said, "might I inquire about these scales we've been finding? They seem to be everywhere in your realm." Queen Luminara smiled. "Ah, you've noticed our pixie dust scales. They're a byproduct of fairy magic, shed naturally as we use our powers. In the past, they've always been contained within our realm, but with the weakening of our concealment spells, some have been escaping to the world above." They arrived at the base of the council tree, where a circle of toadstools large enough for the woodland creatures to sit on comfortably had been arranged. Queen Luminara settled onto a blossom that floated gently in the air. "Now then," she said, her expression turning serious, "let me tell you the story of why we fairies have hidden ourselves away all these years, and why it may soon be time for that to change." As Queen Luminara began her tale, Detective Hoot and his friends leaned in, eager to unravel the final threads of the mystery that had brought them to this magical underground realm. Little did they know that their discovery was about to change the fate of Whispering Woods forever. Chapter 4. Tales of the Past. Queen Luminara's voice took on a melodic quality as she began her story, and the very air around them seemed to shimmer with magic. Long ago, when Whispering Woods was young, fairies and woodland creatures lived together in harmony. We fairies used our magic to help the forest thrive, encouraging plants to grow, healing sick animals, and bringing joy with our light and music. As she spoke, images appeared in the air around them, like shimmering mirages. The woodland creatures watched in awe as scenes from the past played out before their eyes. But then the queen continued, her voice growing sad. Humans began to settle on the edges of the forest. At first, we tried to coexist peacefully, even helping them with our magic when we could. But as their numbers grew, so did their desire for the resources of the woods. The images shifted, showing humans cutting down trees and hunting animals. Detective Hoot and his friends gasped at the destruction they saw. Some humans, upon discovering our existence, sought to capture us, to use our magic for their own purposes. It was a dark time for fairy-kind Queen Luminara's wings drooped as she recalled those difficult days. "And so," she went on, "the Fairy Council made a difficult decision. To protect ourselves in the heart of the forest, we would retreat underground, hiding our realm from the world above. We created this vast cavern and the magical hollow tree that serves as its gateway, concealing ourselves with powerful magic." Millie, her eyes wide with wonder and sadness, spoke up. "But why have you stayed hidden for so long? Surely things have changed." Queen Luminara smiled gently at the little mouse. "Indeed, things have changed, little one. Over the centuries, we've watched the world above through our magic. We've seen humans learn to respect the forest, to understand the importance of nature. We've seen the woodland creatures of Whispering Woods live in peace." "So why remain hidden?" Detective Hoot asked, his keen mind already forming theories. The Fairy Queen sighed. "Habit, I suppose, fear of change, and if I'm being honest, a certain amount of complacency. We've grown comfortable in our hidden realm." Rusty, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly perked up. "But now your magic is failing? Is that why we were able to find you?" Queen Luminara nodded. "You're very perceptive, young fox. Yes, our concealment magic has been weakening. We believe it's because we've been disconnected from the world above for too long. Fairy magic, you see, is intimately connected with nature. By isolating ourselves, we've slowly been cutting ourselves off from the source of our power." Detective Hoot stroked his beak thoughtfully. "So the noises and lights that have been escaping, it's not just an accident, is it? It's a sign that something needs to change." "Precisely," Queen Luminara said, beaming at the wise old owl. "Which brings me to why I'm so glad you've discovered us. I believe it's time for the fairies to return to the world above, to reconnect with nature and with our woodland friends. But we're unsure how to do this without causing panic or disruption." Benny, who had been listening intently, suddenly spoke up. "But everyone's already curious about the lights and sounds. Maybe we could help introduce you to the rest of Whispering Woods." The other animals looked at Benny in surprise. It was the most he'd said since entering the hollow tree. Queen Luminara clapped her tiny hands in delight. What a wonderful idea! A gradual reintroduction with the help of trusted woodland friends. Detective Hoot, would you and your team be willing to assist us in this endeavor? Hoot puffed up his chest importantly. Your Majesty, it would be our honor. As Whispering Woods' foremost detective, I can think of no mystery more satisfying to solve than that of reintegrating fairy kind into our forest community. Millie bounced excitedly. Oh yes, I can already imagine the wonderful stories we'll share about your realm. Rusty nodded enthusiastically, and I can help spread the word through the forest. No one knows Whispering Woods' hidden trails better than a fox. Wonderful, Queen Luminara exclaimed. Then let us form a plan. We'll need to move carefully, introducing our presence bit by bit. As the Fairy Queen and the woodland creatures began to discuss ideas, a sense of excitement filled the air. The magic of the fairy realm seemed to pulse with new energy, as if it too were eager to reconnect with the world above. Detective Hoot looked around at his friends, at the magnificent cavern, and at the fairy folk flitting about. He couldn't help but feel that this was the beginning of a new chapter for Whispering Woods, one filled with magic, friendship, and endless possibilities. Little did they know, their adventure was far from over, for as they planned the fairies' return, a new mystery was brewing in Whispering Woods, one that would test the newfound alliance between the woodland creatures and the fairy folk. Chapter 5. A new mystery unfolds. As Detective Hoot and his team worked with Queen Luminara to plan the fairies' gradual reintroduction to Whispering Woods, excitement buzzed through the underground realm. Fairies flitted about, preparing gifts of magical seedlings and luminous flowers to share with the woodland creatures above. However, their planning was interrupted by the sudden arrival of a fairy scout, her wings beating frantically as she zoomed into the council tree chamber. Your Majesty, the scout gasped, trying to catch her breath. Terrible news from the surface. Queen Luminara rose from her blossom seat, her face etched with concern. Calm yourself, Dewdrop. What news do you bring? Dewdrop took a deep breath and reported, the ancient oak of whispers is dying. Its leaves are turning brown, and its branches are withering. The woodland creatures are in a panic. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. The Oak of Whispers was the oldest and most revered tree in Whispering Woods, said to be the first tree ever planted in the forest. Detective Hoot's feathers ruffled with concern. But how can this be? The oak was in perfect health just yesterday when we entered the hollow tree. Rusty's ears perked up. Could it be connected to the weakening of the fairy magic? Queen Luminara's brow furrowed. It's possible. The Oak of Whispers has always had a strong connection to fairy magic. If our concealment spells are failing, it might be affecting the oak as well. Millie, ever the voice of action, squeaked, "We have to do something. Can't we use fairy magic to heal the oak?" The Fairy Queen shook her head sadly. Our magic alone may not be enough, especially in its weakened state. But perhaps she paused, her eyes lighting up with an idea. Perhaps if we combine our fairy magic with the natural magic of Whispering Woods, we might be able to save the oak. Detective Hoot nodded thoughtfully. A brilliant deduction, Your Majesty. But how do we harness the natural magic of the woods? Benny, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke up. The Stonekeeper. My great-grandfather used to tell stories about a badger called the Stonekeeper, who guarded an ancient stone of power deep in whispering woods. Could that help? All eyes turned to Benny in surprise. Queen Luminara clapped her hands excitedly. The Heartstone. I thought it had been lost to time, but if it still exists, it could be the key to saving the oak and restoring balance to the woods. Detective Hoot's eyes gleamed with the thrill of a new mystery. Well then, my friends, it seems we have a new case to solve. We must find the Stonekeeper and the Heartstone, and use them to save the Oak of Whispers. Rusty wagged his tail eagerly. A treasure hunt and a rescue mission all in one. Count me in. Millie bounced on her tiny paws. Oh, what an adventure this will be. Queen Luminara nodded gravely. This may well be the perfect opportunity to reveal ourselves to the woodland creatures. By working together to save the Oak of Whispers, we can show that fairies and woodland animals can once again live in harmony. And so, with a new sense of urgency, Detective Hoot and his team prepared to return to the surface. Queen Luminara assigned a group of her bravest fairies to accompany them, led by the scout Dewdrop. As they stood before the magical door leading back to the hollow tree, Detective Hoot turned to his assembled team, a mix of woodland creatures and fairy folk. Friends, he said, his voice filled with determination, we face a great challenge. The Oak of Whispers, the very heart of our beloved woods, is in danger. But together I believe we can save it. Are you ready? A chorus of cheers, squeaks, and tinkling fairy voices answered him. With a nod, Detective Hoot pushed open the door, and they stepped back into the hollow tree, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them in Whispering Woods. Chapter 6. The Race to Save Whispering Woods. As Detective Hoot and his expanded team emerged from the hollow tree, they were met with a forest in distress. The usual cheerful sounds of Whispering Woods had been replaced by worried murmurs and fearful cries. Woodland creatures of all kinds were gathered around the massive trunk of the Oak of Whispers, watching in dismay as its once vibrant leaves continued to brown and fall. The appearance of Detective Hoot, along with Rusty, Millie, and Benny, caused a stir among the assembled animals, but it was nothing compared to the gasps and wide-eyed stares that greeted the sight of the fairies fluttering alongside them. Before panic could set in, Detective Hoot puffed up his chest and addressed the crowd. Friends of Whispering Woods, I know you have many questions, but time is of the essence. These fairy folk are our allies, and together, we may be able to save the Oak of Whispers, but we need your help. As Hoot explained their mission to find the Stonekeeper and the Heartstone, the initial shock of the woodland creatures turned to cautious hope. Soon, volunteers were stepping forward to join the search parties. Rusty took charge of organizing the search. We'll split into teams, he announced. Each team will take a different section of the woods. Remember, we're looking for any sign of the Stonekeeper or clues about the Heartstone. Millie, using her small size to her advantage, scurried from group to group, sharing encouraging words and relaying messages. Benny, with his newfound confidence, led a team of diggers, ready to search underground if necessary. The fairy scouts, led by Dewdrop, took to the air, their magical glow illuminating the darkening forest as twilight approached. They sprinkled fairy dust as they flew, temporarily strengthening the weakening trees and plants in their path. Detective Hoot oversaw the operation from the branches of a nearby elm tree, his keen eyes scanning the woods for any sign of the Stonekeeper. As the search stretched on, however, worry began to gnaw at him. The Oak of Whispers was deteriorating rapidly, its creaks and groans audible even from a distance. Just as despair began to set in, Excited shout rang out from the western part of the woods. We found something. Detective Hoot and the other team leaders rushed to the scene. There, in a small clearing surrounded by ancient stones, stood an old, grizzled badger. In his paws, he held a glowing stone that pulsed with an inner light. Grandpa Digger Benny gasped in surprise. "You're the stonekeeper." The old badger chuckled, his eyes twinkling. "Indeed I am, young Benny. I've been waiting for the day when the Heartstone would be needed again." Detective Hoot stepped forward, bowing respectfully. "Stonekeeper, we need your help. The Oak of Whispers is dying, and with it, the magic of Whispering Woods." Grandpa Digger nodded solemnly. "I know, Wise Owl. I felt the imbalance growing for some time, but the Heartstone alone isn't enough to heal the oak. It needs to be combined with the magic of the forests and the fairy realm." Queen Luminara, who had been observing quietly, flew forward. "Then let us combine our powers, Stonekeeper. Fairy magic, woodland magic, and the power of the Heartstone together, we can restore balance to Whispering Woods." With no time to lose, they rushed back to the Oak of Whispers. The great tree was now more brown than green, its mighty branches sagging dangerously. Grandpa Digger stood at the base of the tree, holding the Heartstone high. Queen Luminara and her fairies formed a ring in the air around the oak's canopy. Detective Hoot, Rusty, Millie, Benny, and all the woodland creatures gathered in a circle around the trunk, paws and claws joined. Now Grandpa Digger called out, "Focus on your love for Whispering Woods. Think of the joy it brings, the life it sustains. Let that energy flow through you." As one, they closed their eyes and concentrated. The Heartstone began to pulse more brightly, its light synchronizing with the glow of fairy dust. A warm, golden energy flowed from the stone, up through the roots of the oak, and into its trunk and branches. Slowly but surely, the brown leaves began to regain their color. New buds appeared on barren branches. The creaks and groans of the oak were replaced by a gentle whisper that seemed to say, "Thank you." As the golden light faded, Detective Hoot opened his eyes to a transformed Whispering Woods. The Oak of Whispers stood tall and strong once more, its leaves a vibrant green. All around, the forest seemed more alive than ever, with flowers blooming and trees standing straighter. But the most beautiful sight was that of fairy folk and woodland creatures standing side by side, gazing in wonder at what they had accomplished together. Queen Luminara fluttered down to land on Detective Hoot's branch. "It seems, my friend, that we've not only saved the Oak of Whispers, but we've also begun a new chapter in the history of Whispering Woods." Detective Hoot nodded, his heart full of joy. "Indeed, Your Majesty, and I have a feeling that this is just the beginning of many wonderful adventures to come." As if in agreement, a gentle breeze rustled through the leaves of the Oak of Whispers, carrying with it the promise of a brighter, more magical future for all the inhabitants of Whispering Woods. In the days that followed, Whispering Woods was abuzz with activity and excitement. Fairy folk and woodland creatures worked side by side to build new homes and restore old ones. The hollow tree, once a secret entrance to the fairy realm, became a bustling thoroughfare between the two worlds. Detective Hoot found himself busier than ever, solving mysteries that bridged both realms. Rusty became an ambassador of sorts, using his knowledge of the woods to help fairies and animals alike navigate their new shared home. Millie started a storytelling circle, where animals and fairies could share tales of their different worlds, and Benny, with the guidance of his grandfather, began training as the next stonekeeper. As for the Oak of Whispers, it thrived as never before. Its branches now sparkled with tiny fairy lights at night, and woodland creatures found its shade even more welcoming during the day. And so the mystery of the hollow tree had led to a far greater discovery, that when different worlds come together with open hearts and minds, magic truly can happen. As Detective Hoot sat on his favorite branch one evening, watching fairies dance with fireflies while woodland creatures cheered from below, he couldn't help but smile. Another case closed, he murmured to himself, but a whole new adventure just beginning. The end.